Hello, my name is Gary Lapointe, and I'm a founding partner at Aptalon, a SharePoint and Office 365 consulting company. Today I'm going to show you how to install the recently released SharePoint 2016 Feature Pack 2, and once installed, I'll show you how you can test the new SharePoint Framework integration provided by Feature Pack 2. As you may already be aware, SharePoint Framework is Microsoft's latest development model for customizing SharePoint. We've been able to use the SharePoint framework with SharePoint Online for quite some time now, but with the release of Feature Pack 2 for SharePoint 2016, we now have the opportunity to develop SharePoint Framework client-side web parts for our on-premises environment. This allows you to have a single code base for both SharePoint Online and SharePoint 2016 on-premises. But before we can deploy to SharePoint 2016, we need to make sure that the Feature Pack 2 has been applied, so let's get started with that. Within my SharePoint 2016 virtual machine, we're going to go ahead and install Feature Pack 2. First, we need to go ahead and download it. So if we just do a search for SharePoint updates, you should be able to find the SharePoint updates page. And on this page, you'll see that we have the September 2017 update. Now this is going to correspond to Feature Pack 2. Now you'll see that there are two updates that we need to install. We're going to have to go ahead and actually install both of those. So if you navigate to those, you can see here I have a download link for that, and of course if I scroll down for this one, I have another download link there. I've already downloaded these updates to my local drive, so we can go ahead and actually just get started and install those now. So there's no particular order. You can install these, the language neutral or the language specific one first. It doesn't really matter. Once we click on this, it's going to take a little bit of time, but we accept the license agreement. Click continue, and we'll give that some time to run. Okay, so through the magic of video editing, you didn't have to sit and wait for the entire process to complete. Looks like that installation has finished. It took me about 10 minutes on my end. Your time may vary, and there are some ways to speed that up through disabling services and whatnot. So now that it's installed, it's going to ask me to go ahead and do a reboot. So I'm going to say yes, and then we'll come back just as that's finished. Okay, so that reboot is finished, so we're going to go ahead and come back into our installs folder and then go ahead and kick off the next install. And as I noted earlier, it doesn't matter the order, but I do prefer to do the STS one first, which is the language neutral information, and then the language patch afterwards. Doesn't really matter though. And go ahead and accept the license terms, continue. And again, we'll let this run. It'll probably take maybe not quite as long as the first one, but we'll go ahead and let that finish and then cut back when it's done. Okay, now that that's complete, our Feature Pack 2 is installed, but we're not done yet. With any update that you do for SharePoint, you have to run the configuration wizard, whether it's a cumulative update or even a security update. It doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to run the SharePoint 2016 products configuration wizard. Okay, once that comes up, we're just going to hit next on this first screen. It's going to tell us that it's going to be restarting some services, IIS, the administrative service, a timer service. So obviously when you're doing any kind of patching like this, you want to make sure that you're taking the particular machine that you're patching at that time out of rotation, or you're doing it during off hours. And just go ahead and click next on this first screen. And now it's going to go through the 10 various steps. You can, of course, go to the command line and just run this via PowerShell. You can run the psconfig exe and pass in various parameters. I find it's actually better to do this. Make sure it runs through everything. You're not having to worry about, did I type that command correctly? But there are some benefits just from an automation point of view from using the command line. But personally, I feel it's much safer just to go ahead and use the configuration wizard itself and let it do its thing. So we're going to go ahead and let this run for a bit, and then we'll cut back when it's finished. Okay, we can see that we now have a successful completion of the SharePoint Products Configuration Wizard. So we're going to go ahead and click Finish on that, and then we want to go ahead and validate the version number that was applied, just so we can see that yes, it was actually applied correctly. So within Central Administration, if we come to the Upgrade and Migration tab, We can first check the upgrade status and see that yes, our upgrade did complete correctly. And if we come to the check products and patch installation page, we can see here that the language dependent pack 16.0.4588.1000 was installed, and the language independent pack 4588.1001 was also installed. So those are the two version numbers associated with the September CU or Feature Pack 2. So as long as we see those, we know we should be good. Now that we've got Feature Pack 2 installed, we can go ahead and create a SharePoint Framework web part and do a test deployment. First, we need to make sure that we've got the right prerequisites. So if I open up a new browser tab here and go to the Node.js website, we want to make sure that we're running the LTS version of Node.js. So you can download that and run it. I've already run and installed that, so I'm just going to cancel this. The next thing we need to do is go down to PowerShell and check and make sure that we've got the right version of the Yeoman generator and gulp installed. So I've already installed them here. So if I run a npm list g depth 0, you can see which versions of everything I have installed. So you can see that I currently have the Yeoman template generator version 2, gulp 391, and the Microsoft Yeoman SharePoint generator 1.0.2. Prior to today, 1.0.2 would be the version of the Yeoman template generator that you would need to use in order to deploy your SharePoint Framework web part to your on-premises environment. But today at Ignite, Microsoft released the version 1.3 incarnation of the templates. So now we'll have an option to actually pick whether or not we're going to be deploying to SharePoint Online or SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Prem. If we choose to deploy to SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Prem, then it's going to create effectively a earlier version of the template for us, one that does not include things such as the SharePoint extensions or the tenant deployment option. And basically, if you think about it, SharePoint Online, they're able to push out the server-side dependencies basically at will, whereas on-prem, Microsoft has no control over our environment. So Framework 2, or Feature Pack 2 rather, has a set of server-side dependencies that are effectively linked to the 1.0.2 version of the SharePoint framework, if you think about the APIs, the service endpoints, and whatnot. So again, if we use 1.3 version of the template, it's going to give us a nice little GUI so that we can actually choose what environment we're going to target. If you don't have gulp or Yeoman installed, you can install those by simply type in npm install -g yo gulp, and this will install both the Yeoman templates and gulp, the latest version, to the global namespace. Again, I already have those installed, so we're not going to bother with that. Now, because I have the 1.0.2 version of the Microsoft generator installed, I want to go ahead and update that. And we can see which versions are currently available. So if I do npm view Microsoft generator SharePoint, and we just want to see the versions. So this will show me all the versions that are currently available, and we can see 1.3.0 is currently now available. So I'm going to do npm install-g Microsoft generator SharePoint, and this will just get us that latest version, or I could specify a specific version here like that. So let's just do that. So this is going to go ahead and run in the background and get that installed, and we'll go ahead and skip to the end. Alright, so it looks like that finished, and if I go back up to where we got the listing of versions initially, we should be able to see now that 1.3 should be installed. And we can see that it is in fact there. So it looks like 1.3 has an unmet peer dependency issue. We can see that here. Not sure if that's going to cause us any problems. I believe this is going to be required by Webpack. If we scroll up, we can see that we also got that error here. So we'll see as we go through if that's going to cause any problems. We might need to install that dependency manually. So we'll take a look at that once we get to that point. Now I'm just going to go ahead and just clear the screen here, and we'll go ahead and set up our initial project. I'm going to move into a work directory that I created here, and then I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory for our new project. Let's move into that. And now I'm going to go ahead and run the Yeoman template for SharePoint Framework. And we can see now it's prompted us to create a name for our solution. It's using the current folder name to do that. I'm just going to leave the default. And this is the new functionality that we have with 1.3, where it's now asking, what do we want to target? Do we want to go only to SharePoint Online, or do we want to target SharePoint 2016 and onwards, as well as SharePoint Online? That's an important note, because these framework components will work on both if we target SharePoint 2016. I can take the same code base, deploy it to 2016, and then also go and deploy it to SharePoint Online. The downside is that we won't be able to leverage some of the newer capabilities, such as the framework extensions or tenant deployment, because we are limited to an earlier version of the framework when we're targeting SharePoint 2016 on premises. So I'm going to go ahead and pick SharePoint 2016 onwards. And again, I'm going to use the current folder and the current folder name, Hello World, and just use that for the description. I'm not going to bother picking a framework here because we're just going to keep this really simple. And we'll go ahead and let that create, and then we'll cut to the end. It's going to take a minute or two. Okay, now that that's finished, I can go ahead and open that up in Visual Studio Code. And we can see here it created our project structure for us. And if we look at our package JSON, we can see that it is actually targeting the 1.1 version of our extensions, again, because we're using an earlier version when we are pointing to SharePoint 2016. I'm going to go ahead and open up our integrated terminal, and because this is the first time running this, I need to trust the dev certificate that is being used. So I'm going to run gulp trust dev cert, and this will go ahead and add our local development certificate as a trusted certificate, just to avoid warnings. So now I'll go ahead and run gulp serve to open this up in the local workbench. So we can see now, just like with developing any other SharePoint Framework web part, I have our workbench here, and I can see my Hello World web part right there. Now if I were to come over to my local SharePoint site and change this to workbench, just like developing SharePoint Online, I can go ahead and add that web part here, and again I have all the same capabilities I would with SharePoint Online in that, except now I have context to my SharePoint 2016 environment. What I want to do now is go ahead and show how we could add this to our app catalog and actually add it to a page. So I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to run gulp bundle, and then we'll run gulp package solution to actually create the solution package for us. And we can see that now over in this SharePoint folder, I have that solution file there. So I'm going to open that up in Explorer. And if I tab over to here and open up the app catalog, I'm just going to drag that in to here. And we can see now it's still pointing to local hosts. This will be useful for doing development. Once we're ready to actually officially deploy it, we'll want to change our configuration file so that it is pointing to a CDN. So I'm going to deploy that. Now I'm going to come back to our site, and now we need to go ahead and actually add that app to our solution. So I'm going to come to Site Contents, Add an App, and Hello World. So we can see now it's adding the application to our site. Looks like that's finished. And if we now come and say I want to create a new page, I'm going to call this Test 1. And if I hit Insert Web Part, you should see this new Other group here. Now this is because I didn't change the default options there, so you can specify an existing group or a different name for that. So I'm going to add this guy to the page. And you can see that it's actually not doing anything. Well, the reason for that is because I forgot one step. Right? So again, this is pointing to localhost. So if we now simply run gulp serve no browser, I'm going to actually spin up the local web server to serve this content. And if I come back here now, I'm just going to save this as opposed to doing a refresh. And we can see now that that content is there. And if I edit the page and edit this web part, we can configure this. We can change properties. You can see how it's edited in real time there. Save that. Again, I'll save this here. And if I come in and edit the web part itself, we'll just add some test content here. Save that. It's going to rebuild. And once it's finished rebuilding, I can simply refresh this page and you'll see that updated content. And there you go. So now that it's added to the page, this way I can go ahead and continue my development and do what I need to until I get it right. And then once you're ready to actually deploy, you would change the path so you're no longer pointing to localhost, but maybe you're pointing to a local document library or an Azure CDN or some other third-party CDN or something like that. The point is, this works great pointing to localhost because now I can just simply do a refresh, make a change, do a refresh. But once you're ready to deploy, you're going to make some configuration changes to make that work. So that wraps up this video on how to use Feature Pack 2 and the SharePoint Framework to deploy a custom web part to your SharePoint 2016 environment. Now, if we go back to our slides, I want to show you just a couple of links here. We have the PNP developer site. There's a lot of great resources there to help you get started. Also the SharePoint Framework developer site, some simple point-by-point steps to get going with the framework. Within that site, there's also the 2016 support documentation there, just kind of giving you the details about what you need. That document still references, at least at the time of recording, the need for 1.0.2 of the SharePoint framework. Again, 1.3 was just released, so they just haven't updated that documentation yet. And of course, you can get to the Feature Pack 2 downloads from the SharePoint updates page. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you found it useful, and thanks for taking the time to watch it.